Greetings from Vicksburg National Military Park in Vicksburg, Mississippi, where we just spent an afternoon touring a place that we really should have planned an entire day for.
A day for sure, not maybe more than that, but we've all learned that we take way longer than the rangers say it should take us to do something because we like to get out and read things and then look more things up. And we like to shoot video and take pictures. And so, well, when they say it's going to take you 1 to 2 hours to do something, we really have to plan for like 5 or 6.
Us aside, and the fact that we do take longer than everybody else, I don't know how anybody does this park in an hour or two.
Oh no, you can't even drive it in that unless you're going over the speed limit, which you shouldn't be.
And a big part of this park is there is an auto tour. It's 15 miles long, and you're driving through, and you're seeing all kinds of memorials and monuments and informational signs, and you get to see the battlefield and where all the battles took place, and the bugs. There's one probably crawling on the lens right now.
Where did they all come from?
But I don't see how you can do it without, unless you just drove straight through and just looked at the trees. I don't know how you do it in an hour or two.
And you really shouldn't drive through this because this is hallowed ground. A lot of men lost their lives here, fighting for our country, and it represents all of that. And there's a lot of monuments and signs and tributes to those people. Whether you're here to see the monuments, the battlefield itself, some of the old buildings, the National Cemetery, or the Cairo gunship, there's a lot to see here.
It's a USS Cairo. It's Cairo with a Mississippi accent. So they say Cairo.
I don't have a Mississippi accent. I have a Michigan accent, so you're going to get whatever comes out of my mouth.
But it is spelled Cairo. If you are looking it up, that's what it is. And that was a really cool, it was an iron-clad gunboat from the Civil War. There is a lot to see here, and you can kind of break it up. I mean, there's the auto tour, and there are some places to pull off and stop and read some of the signs, and there are turnouts that are numbered on the map, so you can get the map, or if you have the National Park Service app, there's the self-guided tour that you can listen to different things and learn stuff. The Cairo is in its own museum, which was really cool.
Well, the boat itself is outside under a big canopy tarp, but it does have its own separate museum, separate from the visitor center at the park.
And there's a lot to see in there because when they raised that ship, after it had been in the bottom of the river for 100 years, they were able to collect everything that was still in the ship because it went down in, 12 minutes when it sank. And so everything just went down with the ship. And so everybody's sort of daily life is in there, plus what was going on with the armaments. And I thought that was a really cool part.
It was crazy. Literally 100 years later, they raised it up. And what I was surprised at is the river hadn't washed any of it away. It hadn't disintegrated too many things, but it was mostly just buried in the sediment at the bottom of the river. I mean, it took them almost 100 years to find its location. So it's not like it had been looted. And since nobody lost their lives, it wasn't a grave site. It was literally just the remnants of the ship. So I was surprised how many things they found and the relative condition of the ship after 100 years. Yeah.
You had mentioned a big part of this park is the hallowed ground. And there is the National Cemetery here. There are 17,000 Union troops buried here, 13,000 of which are just numbered gravestones. They don't know who they are. It was after the war was over, they went through and found all the makeshift graves they could in the area. I mean, 10,000 Union troops were killed here in the Vicksburg battle alone.
Yeah. And what was, I guess I never realized this, the national cemeteries were designed for Union soldiers only, not the Confederate soldiers. So while there are some Confederate soldiers buried here, the majority of them are in a separate cemetery in the Vicksburg area because when the cemetery was first started, they weren't, I guess, technically considered part of, the Union at that point because they'd fought on the wrong side. And so they're elsewhere. So I was expecting everybody from the battle to be there. But now it actually includes World War II, Korea, World War I, and various others. But they closed it to new grave sites in the 60s. So it's full now. You can't be buried in there.
Mm-hmm. It is an impressive cemetery. It's sad when you look out and you see those numbers of gravestones that are out there. And Vicksburg, for those who don't know the military history, was a huge battle. It was a siege actually for 47 days. The Union surrounded the Confederacy, who had surrounded Vicksburg with forts and all kinds of other military encampments. And it was just an incredible battle that ended up with a lot of people dying. And then they ended up with the siege for 47 days before the Confederates finally surrendered. And what made this really important was it was kind of the last straw of the Union coming south and being able to get control over the Mississippi River and then cutting off supply lines and essentially cutting the Confederacy in half. And so that's why this is such an important battle overall. But the fact that they were able to maintain this land is incredible. And in fact, at one time, the federal government had the entire siege area, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I was reading that I don't know what the acreage was, but they did have the entire siege area protected. But in I want to say the 60s, they gave up 1/3 of the parkland so that I-20 could be built through here. So now there's a highway running through the middle of what was the battlefield, which is too bad. And we have seen that in other states where they've taken up and destroyed different parts of history for our, national roadways, which, take it or leave it. That's what happened. So it's still an impressive amount of land that they have here, though.
It is. And as you drive through it and you walk through parts of it, you realize how much land they were fighting on over here. And the way they've got the park laid out is with different signs that show you where were the Confederate lines, where were the Union lines, where were different trenches built, that kind of thing. So it's interesting from that perspective to try to stand there and imagine what it was like with that many thousands of people fighting over this much land.
So when you come to visit, the first thing you should do is stop at their visitor center, get your map, get your information, watch the park video because that will explain the whole battle before you go out and see the battlefield. Pick up your Junior Ranger book. And this one was really cool because it is chock full of questions about the things that you're seeing, and it is asking you questions about the things you're seeing. So as you go, it's like, hey, where was this monument or this picture, and what monument did it go to? So it was forcing you to actually look at the monuments, read the signs, which I thought was really cool. In addition to everything about the battlefield, we also learned a little bit more about the general town of Vicksburg and the battle itself. One of those things I found really fascinating that they explained at the visitor center was that the families that were not fighting, the families that were just living in the town, were so concerned for their lives that they dug caves under their houses and in the hills, and they would live in these caves for days at a time. They hauled all their furniture, their bed chairs, their rocking chairs, their desks, their rugs. They hauled everything down there and lived in it. And there's a couple examples in the visitor center, including some actual furniture that families had. So I thought that was really cool and a different part of the Civil War history that I never learned before. That how the families survived when the battle was raging all around them. As you're driving through the park, you'll have the Confederate line on one side marked by red signs, interpretive signs, and on the other basically side of the road, you'll have all the blue signs, which are the Union signs in the Union line. And so you can kind of understand as you're looking across the vast landscape of these rolling hills, how they were fighting each other and digging trenches and having to climb up the hills and getting fired on. And one thing I found really fascinating by explanation of one of the interpretive signs was how different it looks today than it did back then, because all the land had been cleared either for farming or for housing or for the military encampments. And so they basically clear cut all of the trees and forests, and it was wide open. Today, 160 some years later, all those trees have grown back. So you don't have the wide open expanse except for in a few places in the park where you can really, really see the Confederates were way up here. The Union was way down here. They were trying to push up this field. Cannons were firing here. Cannons were firing here. And you're like, oh my gosh. They were doing this in wool uniforms in the summertime in Mississippi. Oh my gosh, that just had to have been horrendous for both sides.
I lost track of how many hundreds of monuments and memorials and different things there are to look at in Vicksburg at the military park here. But one of the things you want to make sure you stop and look at are the state monuments. There are smaller memorials and things for the different infantry regiments from each state, but then you said each state got to put its own monument here.
When the park was established, part of the enactment was to allow each state that had troops that fought here to erect a special monument. And some of them are quite very large, ornate. I was at Ohio's that's like this huge like Coliseum looking big building.
Illinois, I think. It looks like the Parthenon. Oh, yeah, I mean, these things are large enough. It almost reminded me of some of the things you see in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
I mean, they're massive.
You're right. Maybe it was Illinois, and I think Mississippi had a big one.
You might have to turn your Junior Ranger badge in now if you got that one wrong.
Oh, no. Well, it's the fact that there's just so many of them. But what was interesting I read was that right away, the Union states came in and they built these big monuments. The southern states took quite a while to get their monuments in here because the entire South had to be reconstructed economically, and so they didn't have the funds right away. But they're all here now. Some of them are very cool. It's easy to find those monuments because they are marked on the map and on the driving tour. So as you're driving around, you can kind of say, oh yeah, this one's coming up on the right or the left. And there's almost always a pull out or turn off area for those monuments so that you can, because the road's pretty narrow through the park. But at least at the big monuments, there's usually someplace you can pull off to stop, get out, take pictures.
Well, for a good chunk of the park, for the drive that goes through, it's a one-lane, one-way road. And I should mention, we dropped the trailer. We have the Airstream with us and left that in the visitor center parking lot. There are a handful of large RV spaces, and they do let you drop your trailer. They do send coach buses through there, so they said you can go through with RVs, but there's a lot of places you wouldn't be able to stop. And having done it now in just the van, I'm glad we left the trailer behind.
Well, yeah, because we wouldn't have been able to pull off and stop and see all the things that we wanted to see, and we had to back up sometimes because we'd pass something and we're like, oh yeah, we want to go take a picture or get out and look at that. So I would for sure drop your trailer if you've got anything, bigger than like a Class C.
Yeah, and since they let you do that, take advantage of it. It's always a lot easier to do that. There's quite a few hills in here because of the terrain, so it's just easier without towing the RV behind you.
No matter how you get through the park, whether you're towing your trailer or not, one of the things that I didn't really realize, and is actually kind of sad, is that this is really a driving park. I was expecting a battlefield where you could get out and wander around and do some hiking or walking around to see the different monuments and the different sections of the battlefield. Unfortunately, time has taken its toll on this park, and the grass is so overgrown in places that you can't even get out to see some of the monuments. You just have to take pictures from the road.
The whole experience is kind of sad. I mean, it is in general. It is about the U.S. Civil War. That was a very sad time. It was a devastating time for our country and a terrible time in our history. And you think about the men who fought and died here and what they went through, and that is heart-wrenching when you think about that. But to me, it's also really sad to see the condition of parts of this park. They're trying to do what they can, but there are so many places where you'll stop to look and you can't get up to a memorial or a monument, or there's lots of informational signs that clearly look like they were down what used to be more of a trail. And we had a local who stopped at one point, and there's this one, I remember which one it is, but one of the areas where you're up high where the Confederates were and the Union was trying to charge up this hill, and so many people died there. And he said you used to be able to walk down through a trail there, and they had markers where you could find out information about what was going on and which general was killed here and what major was shot there. And it would be really interesting, but you can't get to it because the grass is so high. And this is not a state where I'm going to traipse through the grass. Considering the amount of snakes and everything else that they have here, it's just not safe. And so a big part of the park is kind of cut off because of that.
Yeah, I don't feel like you get the true, immerse yourself in the battle experience that you may get at other battlefields if you've visited those.
And it seemed to me like this has been a long-standing problem. This is not a recent development. That
these trees and grass don't grow overnight. No, this has been years and years of neglect.
It grows fast, but you can tell things have not been maintained for years.
All we need is a zero-turn mower to take one pass from the parking area up to the monument and back. So if you're in the Vicksburg area and you have a mower and you want to volunteer here at the park, I'm sure they'd love to have you.
I would add, though, that despite what we're saying about things being run down, don't let that deter you. Get to this park. Keep the visitation numbers high. Have the federal government realize people need to see this park and learn the history, and maybe they will dump some more money and more resources into it. That would be great. If you are in the Mississippi area at all, make some time. Get to Vicksburg National Military Park. In the meantime, keep on trekking.
And we'll see you out there.
They let you drop your trailer here at the visitor center parking lot. There aren't very many RV spaces, but there are a few. But you know how often people in cars like to take up large RV spaces unnecessarily? That's why we put cones down, so that we reserve the spot for our van so somebody doesn't park there and then we can't hook up when it's time to go.